Have you ever dieted? I'm going to take a wild guess and assume you said yes, especially if you live in the US. I have dieted many times. And while it hasn't been all bad, I've learned a lot about myself and learned to love vegetables more, I am still relieved to be beyond those extremes. The thing is, I wasn't obsessed with dieting. I didn't grow up thinking I had to, but rather chose it later in life when I was unhappy with my body and my life and wanted to make a change. And when I did, I didn't join groups that do weigh-ins and I didn't purchase meals to eat. And still, it overtook my life as I spent money on very specific foods and a ton of time researching how to do things just right, or what I thought was just right. And worse yet, I was reminded at every turn of what I wasn't doing right. We all want to be healthy, but is dieting the answer? My guest today says no, and I'm with her. Diets have a high failure rate. We're talking 90 to 94% of people who diet regain the weight within 2 to 5 years. And diets have many side effects, not the least of which is an increase in stress response and a decrease in quality of life, which I know sounds counterintuitive. But really, despite what they claim and what we are led to believe, diets don't work. So how do we ditch the diet and yet still find a way to be healthy? That's what we're talking about today. You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping clients make space for what matters most in their lives. Join me each episode and we'll talk about decluttering, stress management, habits, personalized productivity, gratitude, and so much more. I understand the overwhelm of life because I'm a wife, mom to kids and cats, and a former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. I am delighted to welcome Megan Hadley to the Positively Living podcast. Megan Hadley is a registered dietitian nutritionist and an expert in intuitive eating practices. Through her private practice, Simple Nutrition in Greensboro, North Carolina, and membership Fork the Food Rules, she helps people who are frustrated by their food and body struggles stop the exhausting work of trying to find and follow the right eating plan and start experiencing the freedom, confidence, and health that comes with being more intuitive with food and body, by helping people realize that eating does not have to be as complicated as the diet industry makes it out to be, that it can be simple. She helps people create space in their lives for what matters most to them. Does that sound familiar? You can see why I wanted her to join us, right? Megan's approach is focused on simplicity, self-compassion, and data-supported choices for us to truly live well. And she does so with something called intuitive eating. Today our conversation highlighted dieting, what it is, why it doesn't work, and what you can do about it. But we also cover body positivity, curiosity, and self-awareness, because all of it applies to the weight loss world we live in today. We are immersed in diet culture that we often cannot see. The signs that you are experiencing it are when you hear or use evaluative words like right and wrong and cheating when it comes to food and movement, and when the only goal is to change our bodies without considering all the other factors of wellness. Megan shares how everything about diet culture is asking us to be disconnected from what we need and how we can care for ourselves best. She describes the judgment we have brought to eating and how we have made nutrition so complicated. Why is it that we value complex over simple? I've noticed this in productivity as well, and you'll hear in our conversation so many overlaps like this. It's time to embrace simple and trust ourselves again. Megan debunks the myths that weight correlates to health and shares how her clients' behaviors are the real indicators. She shares studies and data that may surprise you about BMI indicators, and one of the most frustrating things for all dieters, that weight loss is a predictor of weight gain. We also cover the ironic and frustrating experience of how those who are overweight can be marginalized, which, in and of itself, will elicit the stress response and all its health problems, as I describe in episode 7. Megan also talks about eating and movement as part of our self-care choice, and this idea ties back well to episodes 10, Building Resilience Through Self-Care, and 16, Self-Care as a Business Strategy. How we nourish ourselves and how we show up for life, it's deeply connected. She mentions a book called Body Respect by Lindo Bacon. Yes, I love that last name too. And Lucy Aphramore. Lindo Bacon also wrote Health at Every Size. When I first learned about intuitive eating, I read a book by that title, and I will link all of those in the show notes so you can check them out. But as with most changes, I find that a support system to go with trusted resources will help you most. If you are ready to ditch the diet, whether you're dipping your toe in the pool or you are diving into the deep end headfirst, I highly recommend following Megan on social media and through her site, simplenutritioncounseling.com. Be sure to sign up for her Fork the Food Rules email, a monthly email that contains a carefully curated list of things that she's found to help you on your intuitive eating and body positivity journey. Now, let's hear Megan's wisdom and encouragement for a healthier life. Welcome, Megan Hadley, to the Positively Living podcast. Megan, as you know, I have personal experience with and a deep appreciation for intuitive eating. And I get extra excited when I see a registered dietitian promoting it. And of course, I've been following you on Instagram and appreciating your combination of knowledge and humor and your focus on simplicity. So I knew you were the right person to bring this wisdom to the Positively Living listeners. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. You know I'm so excited to be here.
I would love if you would start by just telling us a bit about you, who you are and who you help and what lights you up.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I mostly help people improve their relationship with food and body. I believe that all bodies are good bodies, and that from cake to kale, that all foods are actually important. They all play an important role. And so I really help folks move through a lot of the conflicting messages that we get about food in our culture. And we make eating way more complicated than it needs to be with all of the shoulds and should nots, the eat this, not that, the eat here, not there. And I really help people connect a little bit more with an innate know of how to eat, combined with a little bit of nutrition information that can help us all out and help them connect a little bit more with how to eat for their body in a way that makes them feel good and that they find satisfying, because we aren't widgets. It's different for everybody.
Thank you. Yes. And I'm always saying, everybody repeat it with me, self-awareness. It's our best tool. And I say it's our best tool for productivity, but I think it's the same thing for living well and for what it is that you do. And so this is exciting to be able to talk about this in a way that says we need to make choices that are best for us and stop listening. It's that outward thing that we do all the time. And boy, does that happen a lot with diet, right?
It really does. We're constantly getting a message that there's a perfect way to eat, a right way to eat. And actually, those messages conflict with one another too. Like eat carbohydrates, don't eat carbohydrates, And so those types of messages really kind of don't give our body, our mind, our taste buds a vote in any of it. The conversation of like, well, what does your body need and what feels best in your body a lot of times isn't even taken into consideration at all. And so we just have a lot of external information that really overrides a lot of times for us, what is it that does actually make me feel good and how do I need to nourish my body?
Yeah, I think it's just so rare anymore that we ask ourselves, especially as women, constantly caring for everyone else and constantly feeling like we're, up against everyone else in terms of comparison and all the things that we have to manage and kind of work our way through. I think it's very rare that we say, what do we want or what feels best or what's right? And I love that you are promoting that. Let's back up just a little in the conversation to talk a little bit about, diets and I think I know the answer about diets working or not working, but I would love to hear from you. What's the deal with diets and with diet culture?
You are so right to back the conversation up to that, Lisa, because yes, and we can talk about how confusing the information is. But let's also talk about maybe should we be listening to any of this type of information at all? And, when I think it's important to define a diet. When I say diet and what I see impacting folks in a negative way doesn't just have to do with some of the more extreme diets that we see promoted. It also incorporates some of the things that we see promoted as lifestyles, or even just maybe counting or tracking anything, be it a certain nutrient or calories or anything like that. Really, anything that's for the primary purpose of changing the body in shape or size. And so, I think it's helpful to keep that in mind in this conversation. When I say diet, that's what I'm referring to. And what we know from actual studies is that somewhere around 90 to 94% of folks who voluntarily try to lose weight, aka diet, usually end up regaining that weight in 2 to 5 years, with a good percentage of those folks actually regaining more weight than they had originally lost. And so a lot of times my colleagues and I say diets don't work. And that's what we mean. It doesn't mean that your neighbor or your coworker or somebody, it doesn't mean that they didn't necessarily lose weight for 6 months or to a year or had some sort of success, if you will, in quotation marks. I'm using my air quotes here, with their goal of weight loss. But the reality of it is that we really, really see most of the time that folks end up regaining that weight. And I don't think that they would necessarily define that as work. And we certainly do not define that as work.
Right. When you're thinking in terms of the long term and the impact and the effects that it has on you, I'm reminded of a study, an article, I can't remember. It was some kind of information that came out relating to the show The Biggest Loser. Those
Mhm.
original participants. Yeah, you're nodding. Yeah. And I'll see if I can find some kind of link to that to put in the show notes. But that was a really big one because I can remember being sucked into that show. I've been sucked into all of this. It's prevalent, and that kind of leads into this concept of the diet culture. It's a little bit like, I think there's a saying relating to a fish doesn't know it's in water. Do you know what I mean? And I think that sometimes we live in this way where we don't even realize how much diet culture we're in. You're so right that it's not always about the extreme things. Like, we can think of extreme ones, and I'm sure I can list off a bunch immediately. Not that I've tried them, but think, like the cabbage soup diet or, things like that. Yeah, those are extremes, but I think perhaps the more insidious thing might be what you're talking about, where it seems like it's touted as a lifestyle, but you're still tracking things and you're still overriding instinct. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. I think that some terminology that we could use to pick up even on some of these smaller things are I'm being good today, I'm cheating today, I feel guilty, this is a guilty pleasure. All of this language is really charged. I'm going to run off or walk off my dinner I just ate or my dessert I just had. That type of language is so commonplace in our culture. I get around a group of any sort of people around a community meal, and I can hear the chatter around me of like, oh no, I'm trying to be good, so I'm not going to eat that. Oh no, I'm being bad today, so I'm going to do this. And all of that evaluative language affects us in the way that we make choices for food for ourselves and how we feel about ourselves based on what we choose. And it really affects overall, like it becomes this external information. that impacts our food choices.
Yeah, it's judgment. We're judging. I can remember in some part of my research, and I have to credit being a coach is really helping me through a big part of this mindset shift to say that this is not a good or bad thing. We're feeding our bodies. We're making choices each and every time.
Absolutely. Like I said, from cake to kale, all foods are important. And we're not better because we ate kale. And we're not bad because we had cake. The reality of it is, I often tell folks, if it's a food that you can't imagine not having from now until the ripe old age of 95, when you pass away, then why ever restrict it from your diet completely? Why ever have a period of time that you eliminate it? Why not find the harmony for you as to how it fits in your life, in your diet, in a sustainable way? Because you enjoy that food and and it should be there.
Yeah, I like that. Well, and it's again, it's coming back to this idea when you were describing these questions, and that you're hoping to get people to ask this more. What feels best in your body? That comes back to an idea of trust and trusting ourselves. And actually knowing what the signs are. And one of the things that I tell my children is you can have whatever you want, but keep in mind your body will receive things differently. It may not be able to detect an overabundance of Doritos. That's all I'm saying, but enjoy them. And just listen, just pay attention. I mean, I'm trying, we all,
Yeah.
but the other thing too with the diet culture is, at least from my standpoint, I having lived it, and I'm curious if you've lived it as well, if you've ever gone through this yourself.
Do you mean having challenges with external food messages kind of
Yeah.
driving? Absolutely. I think it'd be very difficult to live in this culture and not be impacted by this. Like you said, if fish doesn't know it's in water, I mean, diet culture is in the air that we breathe here in the United States. And so, I don't think, even if you're not aware of it, I believe in some way it's probably impacting you.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I've sort of assessed of the situation is that it's another way for us to bond.
Oh,
Right. And that's the same way of, oh, how are you doing? I'm busy. I didn't ask that. And I would love for you not to be. I call that the busy badge of honor. So that's what I talk about. I think for you, you must see, right, that it's always like, oh, well, I need to drop some weight. The pants aren't fitting right. This is happening. That's happening. There's all these judgments about ourselves. And I don't think we always mean it like, it's not like I hate myself. It's not always that extreme, but it's enough to say, I have to change something. And then we start to bond about it, because the minute you mention that, and I do see it in any group of women, there's an immediate understanding, immediate recognition, perhaps even being on the same path, and a bonding that comes from it.
it really is, and it's really unfortunate. And I've certainly participated in those things myself in the past. Of, gosh, I feel fat, or I wish this was different about my body, or whatever it is. And it's a shame that, especially for women, that hating our bodies is something we bond over. And I know you said it doesn't have to feel like a hate, like a really, really strong, intense hate. But it also is, it's this dislike of our body. It's this dissatisfaction and this idea that we are less than unless we fix something.
Mhm.
And that narrative you had mentioned before about body image is that we are constantly being told by society that we need to do something differently as it relates to our body. And even if somebody is in a smaller body, then there's a fear that's generated that their body will become bigger, because there's so much weight bias and weight stigma in our culture. But as I said before, I believe that all bodies are good bodies, and that you can't determine somebody's health by just looking at their shape or size, that they're more important determinants of health. And there's evidence that supports this.
And that's what I'm very interested in, and so appreciate you being here and talking about. I'm curious, what was the shift for you? Obviously, as a woman, you've experienced this yourself, you've been in it, but what shifted for you, and especially as a registered dietitian nutritionist, where you found what the studies or the links or the connections, what was it that helped you get to this point of understanding?
Yeah, I think it started with just intuitively somewhat noticing that if somebody was in a larger body, one that oftentimes, is suggested that they need to lose weight, but if I really get in there and talk to them about, tell me a little bit more about what you are eating, and tell me about your movement, and tell me about your sleep, and tell me about your mental health. And these folks, might be eating a variety of foods, nourishing their body well, not often feeling overly full after meals, moving in a way that makes them feel good in a sustainable way on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's somebody that's healthy and I don't know that we need to make any changes to what you're doing, because you're doing it. And then as I began to be introduced to intuitive eating and health at every size concepts, I started being able to see the literature that supports this. And there's a number of studies, and a lot of them are summarized in a book called Body Respect by Dr. Lindo Bacon and Lucy Aframore, who's a dietitian. And they've combined some of those, in that we really see that folks can be healthy regardless of their size. And really, even some of our national survey data, when we kind of survey the United States to see where our health, to assess the health
Mm-hmm.
of our nation, we even know, as our government knows, that folks that fit in some higher weight categories, which I'm using my air quotes here because I don't like the terms overweight or obese, they aren't helpful terms, and they have a valuation in and of themselves. Overweight suggests that that's more than what you should be. And what we've actually found is if somebody fits in that BMI category, that they're living longer than folks that fit in the lower or the upper category. And with the normal weight, air quotes again, and obese categories, that they actually have pretty close to each other as far as longevity. I mean, why do we care about our health? So we can live long, healthy lives, right? And that's happening for folks. And it's the National Nutrition and Health Examination Surveys, NHANES, that is found that data. And so I was convinced through lots of data that I looked at and felt like I had to support it. It supported what I felt like I knew in the way I've been trained to assess nutrition, right? That weight in and of itself is not a good data point to use in order to determine somebody's health, but it's their behaviors that make somebody healthy.
So those habits, and I love this because this ties into a lot of the things that I'm coaching about growth mindset and planning and goals and aligning yourself. Even James Clear in his book about atomic habits, talks about focusing on the habit process itself and not necessarily the outcome. And I do think as a society, I think just in general, and again, this is not a judgment on that. It's just an observation that we are so outcome based. It's like only if you show the results is this a thing, right?
And this is where it gets us in trouble, and why weight loss pursuits in health, where they get conflated, is that if you pursue a certain way of eating or a certain way of moving, I like to use movement instead of exercise because movement benefits us whether it fits in that traditional exercise category or not. That when you couple those two, you're more inclined to abandon a plan for movement if you aren't seeing this outcome of weight loss. Whereas there's a lot of benefits that come from movement that I like to help my clients notice, is that it helps manage stress,
Yes.
and it can help us sleep better, and a lot of times it can provide us more energy, and it gives us a sense of well-being. And it's a self-care act, in that for many of us, especially now, it gives us a moment out of the home, potentially.
Yes. And the dopamine rush and, all of the
Yes,
things, right, that come from that movement.
all the things. But if weight loss is the primary motivator behind doing the movement, and the weight loss it's not sustainable, it's not seen in the way you want it to, then movement goes out the window. Movement is a positive thing in a way that's able for a body, for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of their shape or size. And so it's the reason why I find that it actually has negative effects to focus on weight loss. It actually can negatively impact folks' health. And we've seen this as it relates to weight cycling, because weight loss is actually a predictor of weight gain. That's an outcome from a study. Pursuing weight loss is actually a predictor of weight gain. And so we see a lot of weight cycling with folks. Weight cycling means losing weight, then regaining it, much as we were talking about before. And this is actually correlated to chronic disease risk. Things like high blood pressure and high cholesterol and type 2 diabetes are linked to this cycle of losing and regaining weight. And probably a lot of the stress that comes with that.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up stress, because that was the next thing I wanted to focus on even more. And I know you've mentioned this to me before, and I think more conversations are happening. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing about the connection to stress and just our overall general health. Of course, then people will say, and weight. Okay, fine. So, but that is how they're expressing it. So we want to at least get into the conversation. So let's get into it. But stress. Talk to me about how much impact that has on all of it, our health, our weight, all of it.
Mm-hmm. I believe it does in a lot of different ways. We think of stress and kind of like, I'm feeling stressed out. And Lisa, you could probably contribute a lot to that part of the conversation, that kind of stress. There's also stress that we put our bodies under by doing things like dieting. When we restrict our intake, cortisol levels increase within our body. So we create a different kind of stress than the stress that we think of when we think of like, gosh, I feel stressed out about like work or how much I have to do today, or, how am I getting it all done? Or because we have our life is more stressful, maybe because of lack of resources and whatnot. Right. So, that certainly creates a stress that can have negative implications on our body. But I think it's also important to note that while I'm talking about all bodies are good bodies, and that's how I see it, it's important to recognize that our society does not. And folks, a lot of times in larger bodies, are treated differently. Even just things like being able to shop and have clothing sizes that are in clothes that you enjoy, like being able to go into a store and know you can find whatever you want. These are privileges that come in our society with being in a smaller body, which mystifies me, Lisa, since most women, the average body size in our country is much larger than what a lot of clothing companies are orienting their clothing and sizes and things like that too. Knowing for certain that you're going to be comfortable in a chair. Think about a chair with arms on the sides of it. A lot, for not all bodies, that's not necessarily accommodating. So, even just the way our spaces are built and the products that we provide are geared more towards, but then there's this societal message that we talked about, that one body type is good and one body type is not good. That message, we could probably do like a whole session on unpacking that message, but I think it's important to remember that folks are treated differently in our society. Comments are made to them about their weight, about their eating, what they should and shouldn't be doing, what they feel like they should and shouldn't be doing. This guilt and shame that we've talked about that comes with failure of losing weight, and I'm using air quotes with failure, that causes a stress. And so I think we don't have causative data as it relates to people in larger bodies and chronic disease. We have correlative data. And it's important to remember that correlation does not equal causation.
Right.
And that folks are marginalized because of body size in our country. And that creates stress. And we know that folks that are marginalized, and we can look at our people of color to see this, are at higher risk of type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. There is a stress that comes, I believe, with being in a larger body. And studies are being done and have been recently published that are starting to look at this more. It's warranted more attention.
And this is so good. And I'm so glad that you brought this up, because again, you're right. There are so many factors at play and pieces and parts to all this. And we could have, another episode entirely on those things, but along those lines. And I'm thinking, just from a personal anecdotal standpoint and knowing a number of friends who've had this experience, another part of this marginalization, another part of the stress on them, and like multiple directions stress, if you will, is the fact that overweight people are often treated differently by doctors.
You cannot be more right.
Right? I'm not a doctor. I haven't done studies on this, but if you start to take this concept and extrapolate a bit very reasonably and very conservatively, if you say this could be potentially a reasonably healthy person with the behaviors, as you said, that are indicative of health, but every time they go for any kind of issue to a doctor, and the first thing they're told, and I do have an overabundance of anecdotal evidence that says this happens. Okay. Every time they go to a doctor and the first thing they're told is lose weight, and the stress. I'm getting stressed just talking about it. And I've also seen people that I know and love being told that and then saying, I'm just not going back to the doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a barrier to accessing healthcare. I know people who do not want to go see the doctor because they do not want to be weighed. They do not want to have the weight discussion. And so that becomes a barrier for them getting routine care that can be helpful for all of us. And then you mentioned the stress, the shame, and the being told to lose weight, where I have definitely seen some folks that are in larger bodies who aren't eating enough and could be defined as having an eating disorder with lack of intake, being told that they need to eat less. And it's because that assessment's not being done. I do want to say that I don't believe our doctors are trying to harm anybody. I'm just saying that this needs to be talked about more and brought to light, because you're right. Like, I don't want to go to the doctor, and the stress that comes with those experiences are harmful.
Right.
They are harmful to our health.
And of course, this segues into what we can talk about that you can do. And I think for starters, having this conversation. So again, thank you so much for doing this. It's so important. It's so important that we have people like you understanding what's going on, creating a wealth of information that is data backed. And I think that's so important. That's showing what's happening here. And I'm certain that there are many medical professionals that can follow suit, that you're probably even connected to, that we can be having these conversations with. So really, it's the awareness that we're talking about here, that this can happen, it does happen, and it's created a tremendous amount of stress and frustration. So now we're going to all take a collective deep breath and say, okay, what can we do? So I know I've had my own story and my own process of trying to figure this all out. Thankfully, I'm a questioner. Thankfully, I've gone through certifications for coaching. And so I've coached myself, and I've had to ask all these questions, and it's still difficult for me day to day to be accepting. But I am encouraged by the data that's backing this up. I am encouraged by the community that we're creating, that you and I are a part of, that has this conversation. So let's shift into a little bit more of what can we walk away with to do. When I say to do differently, I don't mean, again, something you have to change, but more of a way of things that we can release, and maybe a little bit more of the how. What can we do, Megan?
You talked about having a curious mind. And I think even if it's somebody who doesn't want to research things on the internet and find the data, some of us are information seekers. Some of us, I'm talking about what I really try to encourage people to explore is just to have a curiosity about your body and food. If you're somebody who's uncomfortable in their body, doesn't like their body, wants to change their body, or is fearful of it being changed, like, can you take that, if you think about Windows on a desktop of a computer, and just minimize it for a minute? You don't have to get rid of it, but can you minimize it for a minute and start to maybe try to look at food and eating through a different lens and say, what else is important to me other than weight loss? What else is important to me? Maybe it's having more energy. Maybe it's being able to eat some different foods that maybe you've not allowed yourself to eat in a long time. Maybe it is wanting to be able to eat some more vegetables and actually enjoy them. Maybe it is learning a more stress-free way of feeding your family, or finding a right balance between cooking meals and having like really simple stuff. Whatever matters to you, figure out what matters to you and approach it with some curiosity and exploration without allowing the concept of weight loss to influence. Like, if I wasn't trying to lose weight, what would I do? Now, this is where people are like, oh my gosh, all I would do is eat cheese puffs and Oreos all the time. Let myself do whatever I want. And I'll be honest with you, for some folks, they have that experience, and that's okay. It is, because I have never seen anybody adopt that as their new way of eating for life. Right? And it is not what we do in one day, 1 week, 1 month, or even 1 year that is going to impact our nutritional health and well-being. So what I'm wanting folks to do is connect with a way and to inform themselves from their own body that'll last for life. So it's noticing where, and sometimes, like I said, some of the external can helpful, like where am I going a long time without eating? Where am I going like more than 5 hours between meals? What would it be like to put a snack somewhere in the middle of that? What if I grabbed a piece of fruit or some crackers or something like that and had a snack in the middle? Does that give me more energy? Do I like that? Does that work for me? And explore some of those things and notice, are there days where I'm feeling ravenous before dinner? Like, am I coming in the door, like grabbing handfuls of this, handfuls of that while I'm trying to cook and get dinner together because I'm just so hungry? Notice those points and say, what could I do a little bit earlier in the day that would keep me from getting ravenous? How could I care for myself a little bit better so that I don't have these big swings? A lot of times when we wait until we're ravenous to eat, we find that we're really, really, really full when we're done eating, and none of it feels good. The ravenous doesn't feel good, and the feeling really uncomfortably full doesn't feel good. So kind of notice some of these longer stretches and find, like, are there places where I'm swinging from one end to the other too much? And can I shift things a little bit and incorporate some different snacks or more fuller meals or something like that to help me have a more even flow in the way I feel in my energy throughout the day, in my hunger and fullness?
Good. Yeah, it's right. If you're getting hangry, just gonna throw that one out there.
Yep.
That is a sign. That is a clue. It's noticing these trends. It's noticing these responses, and everything that you said, talking about being curious. Just a reminder to everyone: the brilliance of being curious is curiosity doesn't leave room for judgment.
Mm-hmm.
When you're like, why do I do that? You're not saying it's bad that I do that, right?
Yes, it is. It's being curious, it's experimenting, and it's data collecting on what you experience. And you are so right as far as the judgment goes. As a matter of fact, that's a great thing to be curious about. Where am I being judgmental about my food and my body throughout the day?
Right.
And how does that impact how I'm eating? That's even something to be curious and notice. Like, that would be an assignment leaving my office, would be like, let's notice. Because like you said, a lot of these messages we're not even aware of. We're just not.
Right. And then along those lines, I think it's so important that we consider, or when we find out where these messages coming from, and again, most times these messages are coming from places and from people that are really not trying to be malicious. They're not trying to cause problems. It's what they believe. It's passed down from generation to generation. It's in this diet culture that we talked about when we first started our conversation. It's part of who we are and how we live. But making that shift, that requires some community and some support. So that would be the other suggestion that I would have, is to start following the people that will support you in this effort.
Absolutely. There are folks that are putting out really good content on Instagram. Some dietitians and therapists that are specializing in intuitive eating and health at every size practices might have a Facebook group or a membership or something like that. And that can be a great place to meet other people that might be interested. And I say, are you interested in getting off this diet cycle, this diet merry-go-round? And that's where you have the door open for, this curiosity. And sometimes it can feel really good to recognize that there's a lot of other people that are having these same experiences and might even be ambivalent about wanting to get off the diet merry-go-round,
Right.
that's not an easy choice to make, but for those that have done it, they find a much more peaceful place in their life with food and have learned to connect to their body's wisdom. So that serves them throughout the changes of the rest of their life without having to go find another plan to rely on, because the way we eat at one time, it's going to change from what our energy needs and what our desires are for food at a later stage or season of our life.
And I'm so glad you brought that up as well. It's constantly monitoring and it's questioning in a good way to say, am I, really understanding what's going on? Because I've noticed a difference in myself. I'm in what I technically consider perimenopause at this point. And,
Mhm.
it's really paying attention to different kinds of cravings, different needs, different responses, and trusting myself. Like for me, for example, I actually like eating lower carb. I find I'm much more sated and my body just responds well to that. And I can remember having that pendulum swing where first I was dieting and maybe trying that because it was weight loss. And then I was trying to get away from it because it was a diet. And then I was like, wait a minute, but if I'm being true to myself and
Mhm.
how I like to eat best and how I have energy for a long time and I feel good and it feels right, I need to be accepting of that regardless, right?
Yes.
And the other thing in terms of community and support, we talked about how I think, especially as women, but men experience this too as well,
Mhm. For
bond
sure.
over the weight loss. Well, we can continue to find a way to bond over this different, maybe, societally challenging kind of perspective. What may have to happen, just like with any other habit change or shift, other people who are used to you doing a certain thing, they might be a bit uncomfortable. That says everything about them and nothing about you. And again, it's not even a judgment on them. It's a human reaction to saying, why are you doing things differently now? I'm confused. Take a deep breath, stand your ground, go to the people that will support you in doing this. And for the rest, you'll do your best little by little to show them your beliefs and holding your own in that regard.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that I hear clients talk about is that I'm actually some of them become downright evangelical about about this new way. And it quite frankly, for a lot of them, it becomes boring or exhausting or frustrated to constantly be listening to the new diets that people around them are on.
Mhm.
But and it does make other people uncomfortable when you're counter to the culture, right?
Yes.
And everything about our society tells us not to trust our bodies. So the idea of starting to try to trust your own, people, that feels inconceivable to folks. But you are so right, has everything to do with those messages and the way they're internalizing them and kind of being uncomfortable with their own idea of being able to trust their bodies.
Yeah. And there are many of us who have gone down this path and invite you to join us if that's how you're feeling and you have the support. So I think that's a great place for us to wrap things up and have a little bit of fun and inspiration at the end here. Are you ready?
I'm ready, Lisa.
Okay. So if you would fill in the blank for me, please, Megan, the song that always makes me dance.
I'd say it changes, but right now it's Try Everything from the Zootopia movie. Shakira sings the song.
Shakira. I love that one.
Very
Okay.
uplifting.
Yes, that is going on the Positively Living podcast Spotify playlist. Awesome. That's a great one. And it's very inspirational and it's very like it revs you up and it's good for that movement thing. I like that you call it movement instead of exercise. We got to reframe things, right?
It's great when you're moving your body on like some of these nice sunnier days where
Mhm.
it's not too hot anymore here in North Carolina, but
Right.
yes, that song feels great.
Yeah, it's a good fall song for here in New York as well. Okay, now how about the quote or mantra I share all the time is?
There's no perfect way to eat. I say that all the time.
Love it.
There's
There's no
no perfect
perfect way
way
to
to
eat.
eat.
I love it. Yes. Good. Yeah, perfect. Perfect is not a thing. You can't plug it into your GPS. It's not a location. You can't get there. You will be spinning your wheels and driving yourself crazy. Love it. How about a resource book or app that makes my life easier?
A book came to mind right away, Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. It's one that I pick up year after year, and I think it really helps with perspective. And then I'm going to throw one more in, An app that I love is called Paprika. It's the only app I have ever paid for, and it has been well worth it because it is saves all my recipes, and it doesn't, like, when you're looking at a recipe on your phone and your phone goes into the sleep mode and you've got like chicken on your hands and you can't finish the screen.
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Paprika takes that away. When you're looking at a recipe in Paprika, it keeps your lock screen from coming on your phone. So it holds it open and you can click and check off your items as you need to. And you can even have a spot to use for meal planning if you want to drag and drop your recipes into your calendar. You can kind of plan out if you're a meal planner. I just love it. Mostly for the no lock screen thing. I mean, that used to drive me nuts. I'm adding 5 minutes to cooking, just trying to open my screen every time.
That's a game changer. Yeah. Washing your hands and going back. I love it. Okay. Excellent. Paprika. Okay. And then last, but certainly not least, what or whom are you grateful for today?
I am grateful for conversations where people are sharing that they're not having it all together. I know in your podcast, and I feel like in some other spaces I'm just really appreciating where people are being more and more transparent about what is hard and the fact that they can't do it all, and that capacity is different than having time.
Ooh, that's good. Yes.
Yes. And so these things are just, as we're in a place of maybe constantly being able to be nimble about the way we're balancing things, it feels really helpful to hear those things and remember that you're not alone. Just like the community you were talking about, that's helpful for somebody that's deciding not to diet anymore and pursue intuitive eating. For me, that's been especially helpful lately.
Yeah, keeping it real and having really good conversations about that. Yes, thank you. And I am most certainly grateful for you. And I'd love to know, I know the listeners would love to know, where can we find you? How can we get support from you ongoing, especially if we're stepping into this new world?
A couple of great ways that we are offering support to folks is through our Instagram and Facebook page. Our Instagram is @nutritionissimple, and our Facebook page is Simple Nutrition Counseling. We post a video every week that's less than 5 minutes. You don't even have to look at it. You could just listen to it. That's talking about some of these topics we've talked about today. And so that's a great place. And then also we send out a monthly list of favorites. A lot of people ask me like, okay, so like, where can I learn more about this concept? Body acceptance, intuitive eating, so on and so forth. And so we send out a monthly list of favorites that we include, like, listen to this podcast episode about what to do when you have a bad body image day is a recent one that just went out this morning. This recipe that I've been cooking in my house because I love to cook. This Instagram account, posting some great concept. Here's a great article, this book, so on and so forth. So people can go right to those spots and have like a carefully curated list of things that I and my colleague Laura, who works with me, things that we are just loving right now and can encourage people on a journey towards curiosity, intuitive eating, and body acceptance.
Good, because that's what we need, is those resources in addition to that support. I love that. Okay, great. I will make sure that we have links to all the ways that you can find Megan and to be inspired and to be encouraged, because that's exactly what we want. So thank you, Megan. Thank you for shining your light in this world and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me.
When the joy goes out of eating, nutrition suffers. Ellen Satter. Thank you for joining me on the Positively Living podcast. Your time is precious, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you'd like more information on today's show, you can find a link to the show notes on positivelyproductive.com/podcast. If you found value in this show, please click subscribe, and even better, give a quick review on iTunes. It supports me and will help others find the show. If you'd like more positive content, come join me on social media. Positively Productive on Facebook and positively_Lisa on Instagram. Get ready for kids, cats, and all my quirky humor over there. I look forward to having you join me next episode. Until then, keep it positive and keep making space for what matters most.